Hi, Louise.
Hi, Sarah.
We're really that was a standoff.
I'm really sorry, listeners. We're in our own little jokester
We're
world.
yeah, we have our well, we have to have some, levity with the heaviness
Um,
of the book we're reading, The Girls Who Went Away by Ann Fessler, discussing chapter 8, The Aftermath. Yeah,
yeah.
so you
You
might
know,
appreciate our humor.
you might. And before we even get into this, one thing, just how much alike are adoptees and birth mothers
Oh, yes.
with what they struggle
There
with?
was something it really is.
Yeah. Every
So much,
single
so
thing.
many similarities about how.
Yeah. This is kind of, I mean, how she even starts it. Surrendering a child for adoption has been described by many of the women I interviewed at the event that it was the event that defined their identity and therefore influenced every major decision they made thereafter. Since most of these women surrendered when they were between 16 and 23, the event shaped their entire adult lives and affected the timing of ability to pursue their educational goals, their career choice, their decision about having children, their parenting style, friends, parents, and partners.
Everything. I mean, have as a mother, I know that that would be the
Yeah.
case for me. It would be, I don't know how, and they don't get over it, most of them.
No.
It did says, their grief has been exacerbated and in some case become chronic because they were not permitted to talk or properly grieve their loss, right? That's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
just move on. And
Well, it's
how
the
can you
same as
grieve when it's,
adoptees.
yes,
It's so
exactly.
the National Mental Health Association issued a list of the best ways to cope with a major loss, like death of a loved one. This would be very similar because you're literally not seeing your loved one ever again. The first thing is seek out others who understand and make community. That's the very first
Hmm.
thing on the list. And none of
Yeah,
us, and how many ailments could be solved in people's lives by having community, unloading, not holding it in,
I know.
illnesses. I just was thinking
Illnesses.
through all of this. Yeah.
It does, and the studies that have examined the grief of relinquishing mothers have identified a sense of loss that is unique and prolonged.
Mm.
In one such study, the grief was likened to the separation loss experienced by a parent whose child is missing or by a
Oh,
person who is told their loved one is missing in action.
yeah. It's just the unknown. It's not
The,
having closure.
I was just, as I read this, just thinking how I think I would go crazy.
I would
I
too.
I don't know. I mean, we don't
Yeah.
know until we're in this situation. We do see these mothers that, they manage to continue to survive and
Yeah.
but I
They,
don't, I
yeah.
mean, I think I would ruminate and wonder all the time where he was, what's he doing,
Yeah.
how he's being treated. It's just a horrible, horrible loss.
I think that's, well, I have letters from my birth mother that say that she was doing that. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's exactly what they're doing. Even if she gets into every kind of birth mother too. Some are overachievers to prove how great they've done since this thing. What was interesting to me was a common denominator was low self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
really low self-esteem afterwards with men, with other relationships, with
Mm-hmm.
friendships, even if they have the same thing adoptees have, that imposter syndrome, even if they're doing well, they kind of, that's kind of this fake persona. And then the big thing was the PTSD that they're suffering. So they're like suffering in silence, which is where it starts to eat up at your body and your whole, I
That
mean,
how you get ill and
yeah,
illness. Yeah.
but self-esteem, right? I mean, imagine feeling that way. How, just the shame involved. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's heartbreaking, actually.
And then they talk about uh the women being, released from the hospital without any documents related to the birth.
Hmm.
Some did manage to hang on to artifacts. I thought this
Yeah,
was really poignant,
yeah,
or to acquire pictures, like just a couple of little things that some of them said. I cried every night with a diaper I took. So one of them took home her diaper.
God.
I had this diaper and I could still smell her. They took pictures of my daughter and I couldn't wait to get them because I just wanted to have something. I cried and I waited for the pictures to come, but they never came.
Mm. Oh, and another thing, and well, and this kind of was likened to how we felt parenting too, but they were terrified when they had other children of
Uh-huh.
them being stolen. or,
And also
so
then
they're
having a
overprotective. Yeah.
and then or feeling disloyal to the first child.
And a little bit disconnected. Like some were either overly attached to their kids and the other ones were disconnected from their kids because they didn't want to get hurt again in that way. Either way, I was thinking of how that affects now the next generation. So now these
Mm-hmm.
kids who had nothing to do with this are also affected by a child being given away that they didn't even know happened, right? So everybody's
Yeah,
suffering this unspoken thing, including the adoptee, but in this realm, kids we didn't even think about,
I
like
know
other kids, you know?
that because probably like a certain
Yeah.
distance
I mean, I know I did
out
my
of.
stuff before I knew my thing. I did my weird things that probably my son's gonna have to get over with therapy, right? Like the weird things you do. So imagine they're doing things too because you're reacting out of trauma.
I
You
know.
know, yeah, it makes it. This was hard. The stories were hard. They're really hard to read.
And, does another profound impact of
Mhm,
surrender was evidence in the women's subsequent response to babies.
mhm.
There was no middle ground. Some had a really strong desire to have another child and were conscious of trying to replace the baby they had lost. And then
Yeah,
others couldn't stand to be around babies.
yeah. Well, can you imagine?
No,
I
it would
mean,
just be a constant reminder,
yeah.
you know.
One thing I thought you would hone in on, I honed in on it too, was men. One of the most common consequences of relinquishment for this women I interviewed was difficulty in forming healthy relationships with men.
Hmm.
Low self-esteem, anger, resentment, lack of trust they felt made it difficult. Some women dated and married men who treated them badly. They didn't think they deserved more or were just happy to normalize their lives.
Hmm.
So they could have, some of these young women were really promising people, could have ended up in different relationships, not in a relationship, gone on to be whoever, got quickly married to somebody who thought, oh, well, now I have value because I'm attaching myself to somebody with value.
Right.
But they weren't treated very well, most of them. And, you know,
I think there's something to people that might have a tendency to be somewhat abusive can
mhm,
seek out
yeah,
that person with low self. I certainly know from in my
yeah,
case that that was true in my life,
yeah.
attracting people who were not kind to me because I didn't feel good about myself. They can sense it like
It's a
it's
magnet.
a predatory thing, right? Like you can sense the weaker one.
Yeah. And they may not even know they're doing it. It's so subconscious, but they're sensing
Mm-hmm.
and you're sensing. And yeah, it's very interesting how that works out with, and I just felt like, well, that's what adoptees do too. So that's very, once again,
Right.
yeah. Well,
And then the women that had
yeah,
children became overprotective. We know that.
yeah.
We were that too.
Got overprotective to a ridiculous, right? The
Yeah.
other thing they went through, here's just one thing I put numb with capital letters. A few described going through their entire lives feeling somewhat numb until they had reunion. So this is interesting too.
Yes.
Many times in reunion, the illnesses they were, headaches went away, the numb feeling, the openness, like that's how they didn't even realize how many of their feelings were tied up into this until like a child found them and magically they slept better. I mean, all these things. This is how much the body keeps the score. We always
I
talk
know.
about it.
And you know,
Yeah.
this message needs to get even wider and louder. Like so much could be prevented with mainstream knowledge and understanding and acknowledgement of all of this stuff,
Just acknowledgement.
of the adoptees' mental health issues, birth mother mental health issues,
Yeah.
it needs to
Gosh.
be, we need to just pound people over the head with this information, no matter how much they don't want to hear it, listen to us.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
the future.
here's what we talk about. Of course, this book was written, as we said, I mean, it hasn't been that long, but some women spent years self-medicating, same with
Mhm.
adoptees.
Mhm.
Relinquishing mothers are not the only members of the adoption triad comprised of surrendering parents, yet in one survey, only 20% of practicing clinical psychologists felt either well prepared or very well prepared to work with adoption issues, even though 8% of their patients were triad members. About half of these professionals had no graduate coursework that included adoption content. A similar absence of adoption research and study has been found in the fields of sociology and anthropology and in studies of marriage and the family.
Wow. Those are big
Right.
statistics. I mean,
I
actually,
know.
the percentage of people they're treating.
I know.
Well, and it hasn't been that long that, I mean, we have anecdotally talked to friends who are therapists who are like,
Yes.
listen, I'm seeking out the knowledge. We have a friend who watches every YouTube to seek out the knowledge because
Uh,
she wasn't really trained in it and she wants to
Right.
know. And
So
so,
she has to go to a podcast, by two unprofessionals,
hey, we're
by two
professionals.
by two recent, out of the fog. This is where trained therapists are getting information.
I'd like to give Molly a shout out who had like fangirl seeing us. And I was looking around like, who are you excited to see? I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay, I think
Oh
this
my
quote,
gosh. Well,
I'm gonna read Maggie's quote. Listen to this. This kind of sums up. It makes me sad. Not the whole thing, but Maggie, you can't raise that baby alone. No one expects a widow to give up her baby because her husband dies, do they? No, it's punitive. That's it
hmm
in a nutshell. You
hmm
don't deserve the baby and you don't deserve anything that goes with it. It's as simple as that. That's paraphrasing, but punitive.
Punitive.
Because you're
I had highlighted that to bring up at the end of the episode. I'm glad you did. That's it in a
yeah,
nutshell.
that's it in a
You
nutshell.
had sex, you're a bad person. Again, we're talking baby scoop era. You
Is
had
it so
sex,
different
bad
always
person.
though?
No, I don't think it is. Well, certainly after reading Gretchen Sisson's book,
Mm-mm.
it might not have that as, that
Uh,
it's different, but the same, I
It's
guess is what
different
I'm
but the
trying
same, and each
to
culture
say.
is a little different. People around you and
Mm-hmm.
what part of the country you're in and all of it. I bet there
And
is
if
some of
with the
this still just as
religion
bad.
and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Gosh.
So, okay, next week we are on to more of the aftermath, and we're reading a couple personal stories, Susan 3 and Madeline.
Yeah, Susan and Madeline.
Yeah.
Well, now we do have
Oh, we
Kelly.
have a great
Yeah, we do.
story. Ooh, this is a great story. I mean, I say that like great story, but it's an interesting
Very.
whoa, like at
And
every turn, you're
we
like,
met this
whoa.
adoptee, and
Yes.
this she
Yes.
has a complicated thing going on. So
She
stay
came to
tuned.
Kansas City.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, Louise, see you in a
See you in a
minute.
minute.